Hello my beautiful friends, welcome back to Studio Rapour. My name is Rachel and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how I made this succulent tumbler. I had two different forms of inspiration for this cup. One, succulents. If you know me personally, you know I love plants. Succulents were the gateway drug to becoming the crazy plant lady. And I also love a good handcrafted margarita. And with this being a 16-ounce plump tumbler, it is the perfect size to house both of those inspirations. So I will stop rambling and we will go ahead and get into the tutorial. Again, this tumbler is a 16-ounce plump from the Steel Magnolia. I did do 2 coats of modern white spray paint by Krylon after I prepped my cup by sanding it down and then washing it. I do not need a lot of working time for my glitter today since I'm just using one color. So I'm using Mod Podge to adhere my glitter. And the glitter that I'm using is Tiny Dancer from Peachy Olive Glitters. It is by far one of my favorite glitters that I have. It was out of stock for so long and I finally got my hands on it and I am obsessed with it. Typically on tumblers, I do not put a chunky mix on the bottom just because it's really hard to get the bottom smooth afterwards. It's very challenging. So in this instance, what I'm doing, since I didn't really have another color that goes along with it for the bottom, I did apply it like I normally would. And then I just have a piece of parchment paper. I have a bunch of pieces like this that I cut up into small little squares. And I'm just gently pressing down on all of the glitter. I want to make sure that it is laying nice and flat so that as I go into my first couple coats of epoxy, it goes on really smoothly and I don't have to wind up doing a ton of sanding. The epoxy that I'm using is Artist Resin by Counterculture DIY. I mixed up 30 milliliters of epoxy to start with because this is, again, a chunky glitter. I want to make sure I get a pretty decent first coat. After this is all nice and smooth, I'm going to go ahead and use my culinary torch to get any micro bubbles out. Let that dry for 4 to 6 hours and then go into another coat of epoxy. That coat I didn't use nearly as much. But I did, again, want to get a pretty good coat on there. I never flood my tumblers, but again, because it's a chunky glitter, I wanted to try to get away with 2 layers of epoxy, not 3. If you do feel as though after your 2 coats of epoxy, there are some sharp pieces, you can try to sand them down, but if you seem like you're doing too much sanding, just stop and put another coat of epoxy on. After my second coat of epoxy, I do typically let it spin for 8 to 12 hours before I start cleaning it up. I want to make sure that it has cured really, really well before I start manhandling it. You can see I always start off the same. I take a really sharp craft knife and I go along the rim of the cup to remove any excess epoxy that may have dripped. I then use a medium grit sanding block. This one doesn't have an actual number on it. And I go around the rim of the cup as well. I always expose a very fine line of stainless steel so that as I go into my final coats of epoxy, that epoxy is adhering to the side of the cup and not the top of the rim. This way it just lessens the chance of being damaged. I will continue to work my way around the cup, focusing on the bottom portion as well, again, where it can be really tricky to get smooth, and then slowly running my fingers down the sides to make sure that there are no bumps or sharp pieces, especially since we're going to be applying a water slide. Give it a good wash, dry it off, and we are ready for the next step. The water slide that I'm using was a file that I found on Etsy, and I will link that shop down below. I don't usually use a bowl this small to soak my water slides in. For whatever reason, this is what I had in my office at the time. So I'm going to go ahead and let that soak for a few minutes and slowly seeing if it will move along the backing. Because I did actually cut this, it is on whitewater paper. Because I did actually cut it out with my Cricut, the outline did pull off. So I pulled that off gently. And then slowly, once it starts to fully peel off the backing, make sure not to pull too hard so you don't rip it. I'm going to slowly place it, hold it down, and then pull the backing out. You will be able to move it a little bit, and you do need to make sure that your cup is wet as well. This way it will go on really easy. And then I take a silicone brush and remove all the water or bubbles or wrinkles from the water slide paper. You want to really take your time with this process. This water slide does have a lot of detail on it, so it can be difficult to see if there are any wrinkles that are hiding. So really take your time and go over it a couple different times, pick it up, spin it, really get a good look at it to make sure that you are happy with how it's laying before it dries. If you've never used water slides before, they do dry very quickly. So you want to make sure all of the errors are out and done with before it is fully dried to the cup. After I apply my water slides, I always take a couple coffee filters, which I use them because they have no lint on them, and I gently go over the water slide to remove any excess water from that portion or the rest of the cup. I'm going to repeat the exact same process on the other side of the cup. These water slides, for whatever reason, I printed them and cut them a little bit too big, so they do wind up overlapping one another, which on this specific design is okay because you really can't even tell. It just looks like a continuation. But I would make sure, I don't know if I was originally planning on doing this design on a bigger cup. I don't really know what happened here, but they did wind up overlapping. So just make sure when you are printing and measuring that you're doing it a couple times to make sure that it is correct. There's nothing more aggravating than going through and doing all the work and then having it not line up right. I don't know if it's just me or not, but I feel like every single cup I've ever made, there is one thing that doesn't go right. I don't know what the deal is, but I don't know that I've ever had just a totally successful cup. It always seems that there is something that goes a little squirrely. The decal that I'm applying to the tumbler is just something I created on Cricut Design Space. The offset color I wanted to pull in from the water slide like plant colors, and then the actual writing is an opal holographic vinyl, and I think it balances the cup out really well. They're not colors I would typically use, but I think it works really well on this design. Once I have that on really well and there's no bubbles, I'm going to go ahead, put it on my turner, and we're going to seal it with a urethane sealer. The urethane sealer that I use is from Counterculture DIY. It is their quick coat and I'm obsessed with this. I use it every single time I have to seal something onto my tumblers. There is a lot of work done on here between water slide and decal, so I want to make sure that it is nice and sealed so we are drama-free when we go into our final layers of epoxy. The owner of the shop actually told me that you can use this to seal in really chunky glitters as well, which I thought was a great idea also. Once I have a nice even coat of this sealer on my whole cup, I'm going to turn my turner on and let it spin for about 45 minutes to an hour to make sure that it is fully dry before I go into my final coats of epoxy. I did wind up needing 2 coats of epoxy to get my cup perfectly smooth to be done. I went in with this last coat, if you will, let that dry for about 8 hours, and then I went in to my second coat using my culinary torch after each application, of course, to make sure that we have no pesky micro bubbles popping up. I let my cup turn and dry for at least 12 hours before I go into the final cleaning process. I want to make sure before I start manhandling it again, it is really, really well dry. I'm going to first start with my craft knife as always and remove any excess epoxy up at the rim of the cup, and also if there's any little droplets that got inside, making sure not to scratch the inside of the tumbler. I then will go in with paper towel and pure acetone and wipe out any excess spray paint that went inside of the tumbler as well. I do a couple passes of this just to make sure that there's no residue on there, and then we will go in and wash the tumbler with a mild dish detergent. I always use Norwex. It's just what I keep in my laundry room. And I have a designated brush/sponge for all my cup cleanups. That is it for this tutorial. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed making it for you. I really love the way that this cup turned out. It's super cute, and I can't wait to enjoy a really nice margarita in it. If you did like this video or like videos like these, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps support my channel. And I would also love to have you as part of my YouTube family. So if you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. I would love to have you, and push that bell notification so you can be notified of all of my future uploads. I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and until next time, bye.